the right term was in the front, and I was told it didn't matter what I said, so. But I wanted to know, how many of you saw the release of Giving USA when it came out in June? Okay, anybody remember off the top of your head how much was given in the United States in 2022, estimated? Maybe the gal who runs the space. Okay, well, it was 499 billion, 499.33 billion. That is about 20% of all the revenues in the nonprofit sector. So charitable giving itself is not all the funding that you receive. Some of you have memberships, some of you have some kinds of sales, some of you have gala events, and you get revenue that are ticket sales. That's part of that. Many people have contracts with government agencies. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, team. So that it doesn't represent every single penny that you raise, but it's a significant portion. And for some organizations, it's nearly 100%. Absolutely. So not everybody has government contracts. Not everybody has a museum sales shop. Not everybody has a membership program. So for you, it really, really matters how this changes over time. So one of the things I wanted to point out is if you saw it in the news, you probably saw an emphasis on this little drop here from, this is adjusted for inflation, this was 528 billion down to 499 billion. People were saying, the sky is falling, nonprofit giving plummets, and that was the word, dives, plummets. This horrible sounding verbiage that made you think that the end of the sector was ahead. Well, no. I'm here to tell you that one headline based on 1 year evidence is not telling the whole story. And I want to have you have the whole story so that when you go back, you're more informed. So here's the deal. This is 2022 that we're talking about. We're all the way more than halfway through 2023, but the numbers that were released in June were about 2022. Well, 2021, what was happening in 2021? Economically, what was happening? People had more money. Absolutely. We had stimulus checks. We also had a burgeoning stock market. 40% of giving comes from stocks. That's my personal estimate. That's not in Giving USA. They don't report it as far as I know. So when the stock market goes up, giving increases dramatically. We also had this sort of global pandemic thing still going on in 2021. And we also had urgent demands for social justice and racial equity. All of those things pushed giving up to an all-time high. So the needs were super urgent, and the resources were there. That combination of urgent needs and available resources, that drives philanthropy. The year before was 2020, same deal. The stock market wasn't quite so robust, but it was still robust. Urgent needs worldwide that people responded to, and some of us got enough extra above what we needed for living expenses that we were able to share quite easily. And in my household, we got, I don't remember how much it was in stimulus, but everybody got it, and we didn't need it, so we just gave it away. And we were not the only ones. So that drove giving in 2020. So these 2 years that are the highest historically were exceptional years, in part because of the urgent needs, and in part because of the available resources. So, of course, giving was going to return to, quote, normal in 2022. The stock market actually fell in 2022. The crises that had been on the headlines in 2021 and 2020 were no longer in the headlines. And we had this thing called inflation, so people started really being careful about how they used their resources. Even if their own incomes were going up, they kept hearing the news was all about food prices and gas prices and war in Ukraine. And so people started being much more thoughtful about how they gave their money away. And still giving only fell 10%. The stock market went down 25%. Adjusted for inflation, giving went down 10%. And it remained super close to that all-time high. And this goes back to 2017, $500 billion. In 2017, $500 billion was given to philanthropy. And we have been bumping up against that $500 billion every year, or in some cases surpassing it, for 5 years now. We've reached a new plateau. This is not giving has fallen. Giving has settled into a new plateau that is around $500 billion. And that's the message I'd like you to take back. I'm projecting, and this year the stock market is pretty robust. We have some urgent needs. So think about Hawaii right now. There's other needs in our country that are making headlines. So I'm going to predict that giving in 2023, barring some horrible event that happens in the next 5 months, is still going to be at least $500 billion. And when it reaches a new plateau, it tends to last for a while. So back here in the 80s, Giving USA always shows a 40-year historical picture, which is one of its values for us. It's not just, oh, look, giving fell 1 year. No, it gives us a broader context. And so back here in the 80s, when I was in college, giving was hanging out. It was less than 2% of gross domestic product. It was around 1.7% of gross domestic product. And it kind of went up, this was the 82, inflation that year was 15%. This was a recession year, kind of budged up. This is 87. Why did giving go up so much in 87? We had a tax law change. In 87, people knew that the deductibility of gifts was going to change in 88. So they pre-gave in 87 to capture the benefits that they could get. And then guess what? Giving fell in 88. Excuse me, but duh. If people had paid in advance, they're not going to claim that. They can't claim that deduction again. They just paid it a year ahead. So it looks like it went up. It didn't go up for any other reason than the tax law change. But it's still hanging out here. This is the 1991 recession. Kind of hanging out here around just under $250 billion. Then we had this thing called the tech industry, where assets of certain people increased dramatically. Also, we had pretty high employment. So more households were able to give, and lots of households were able to give very generously. So Bill and Melinda Gates gave $20 billion in 1 year, right here in 2020. You can see that big jump. So that's driven by, remember, urgent needs and available assets. The available assets were there. Some of the needs were urgent, some of them were ongoing needs. A lot of people put money into foundations at that point. But that was the overlap, the Venn diagram there, that was happening when the tech run-up happened. This is 2021, we had a recession. Giving fell, Bill and Melinda gave $20 billion. Of course, giving's gonna fall the next year. $20 billion at that point was nearly 1.5% of the total, all by themselves, right? So then we had a slow recovery. We're going up to 2005. This is the housing market. People's assets were in their homes. They were selling their, very few people borrow against their home to make a charitable gift. But when they feel like their home is appreciating in value, they figure their financial position is fairly secure. So they're a little more willing to give from their current income. It's the opposite of what happens during a time of high inflation. Okay, so then 2007, we actually hit a new high in 2007. We didn't know we were going to start a 3-year recession in the beginning of 2007. The recession actually started in December, so almost all giving had already happened at that point. Stock market was strong, people's housing prices were strong, incomes were going up, pretty low unemployment. 2007 looked like a great year, and then that housing bubble started to unravel. And that's what triggered this, all of that stuff with derivatives. I could go into it, but you don't care. It was so long ago, right? But that's when giving fell a lot. It fell the highest, the most it has ever fallen in the 65-year history, 66-year history of Giving USA with those financial events. We're not seeing that, anything like that now. Okay, so now we have the longest continuous stock run-up in America's history, going on from 2010. This is 7, 8, 9. The stock market started to grow again in 2010. It keeps growing, it keeps growing, it keeps growing, keeps growing. Oh, what? Why is this so high? 2017. Dang, there was a tax law change. people took deductions in 2017 that they were still entitled to. They prepaid their giving for 2018. When there is a highly public tax law change that affects deductibility, all you accountant people, you're advising us, oh yeah, give now, take the deduction when you can because it's going to go away next year. So 2017 hit $500 billion in part because of that tax law change. So 2018 fell, but not very much. 19 fell a little bit. This is below, this is close to like 490 here. And then we had the crises of COVID and the cries for social justice and racial equity. So we've been roughly 5 years, 6 years even, at 500 billion. I say that's a new trend. I can see it happening now, even though we still have some people who are working at very low wages. We still have a high income inequality. We are seeing assets and needs start to align, and we're seeing fairly strong charitable giving in 2023. Are there questions about this timeline? Takeaways you want to share with your colleagues, your board? Don't believe the headlines.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Betsy.
Do elections have any effect, like when there's a big election, does it decrease charitable giving?
Yes and no.
Political giving?
So there are some people who substitute political giving for charitable giving during tense election years in certain places. But it is not the whole population. So there are, if a highly contested state, if a governorship in a state is a very tight race, people in that state might reduce their giving, but it does not show up nationally to date. Now, for 20 years, we have seen increasing investment in the political process from all sides, and at some point it will be high enough to tip so that giving is affected. Restricted to people for whom they have to make the choice. I can't do this, I'm going to do that because I care about this issue, whatever it is. So yes and no, sorry. I can't be more precise. Yes, ma'am.
Do you mind if we take pictures?
I don't mind. I cannot give you these slides. They are for sale. You can buy them at thegivingusa.org. I have the link at the end. But if you take a picture for personal use, I didn't see it. So they are copyrighted. But thank you for asking. So I did not explain the bars. The current dollars is, when I earned my first, well, that would have not been my first paycheck, but when I was earning a wage working in a law firm, I got paid at $1, probably $2 an hour right at that point. And those $2 are the same dollars in spending, not in spending power, but just they look like $1. They're just $1, current dollars, not adjusted for inflation. The bars are inflation adjusted, and the gold, as you probably figured out, are recession years, and the gray are years without a recession, and they count a recession if it was in 1 month of the year. Therefore, December 2007 makes the whole year gold because it began in December, according to the folks who decide when recessions start and end. There's actually a group that does that. Other questions about this? The trends? Key messages you want to take back? I'm super optimistic this year, partly because the stock market has been, the last few days not so great, but, frankly, I'm thinking, what am I going to do for Hawaii? That's the kind of emotional appeal that lots of people respond to. And we saw that in 2005 with a crisis in the Indian Ocean after the tsunami. It's one reason this is high. It's the amount Americans gave in response to that crisis. So crisis, need, urgent need, available resources. Okay, so talking about available resources, who has the available resources? Well, let's think about it. There's roughly 5 million corporations in this country. That's not exactly right, but it's close, 5 million. There's roughly 130 million households. Many of us work for corporations. This doesn't count the nonprofits, they're considered separately. So think about where most of the charitable giving is going to come from. 5 million corporations, 130 million households. Most of the charitable giving comes from the earnings that people receive through either their employment or their investment. It's 64% of the total for 2022. It has been as high as 80%. I'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most recent year, it's estimated at 64% of the dollars that went to charitable organizations, not the fees that we paid for tuition or the amount I'm going to pay for my daughter's ER visit or whatever, just the charitable gifts came from living individuals. This is based on tax returns. This is the returns that you and I file, 1040s or whatever version we were filing thereof. That's where these data come from. And because we don't have so much deductibility now, there's also a household survey that feeds into this. It reaches 10,000 people. It's very robust. Another 21%, 105 billion, comes from foundations. Now in East Lansing, I saw the R.E. Olds Foundation. I saw the Granger Foundation. I saw the Capital Region Community Foundation. What other foundations do you have in this area that are giving money out as grants, not just raising it like the Hospital Foundation, the McKenna Foundation, but giving it away? Those are the three I found when I did a quick. Okay? Okay. So when Mr. Olds, when his family created the foundation back in the early 20th century, they were probably still on the board, some of those members of his family. And at that time, it would have been a family foundation because the people who gave the money were making the decisions about the grants. Bill and Melinda, when they were still married to each other, were both on the board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with their friend Warren Buffett and Bill's dad. It was controlled by the Gates family. It is a family foundation. Well, Mr. Old's family they're now in the 5th generation. I don't know the extent to which family members are still controlling how those assets are given away. I can't tell if it's one family member and other trustees who are selected from the community somehow, or if it's all family members. What do you know? All family. It's all family, so it still counts as a family foundation. Thank you, I'm glad to have a knowledgeable partner in the room. So the Olds Foundation is still a family foundation. The Ford Foundation is not. Because the Ford Foundation although it has had members of the Ford family on the board, it is now governed by a board of trustees who are selected for reasons other than their family connection. So the reason I tell you all of this is, one, there's no legal definition of family foundation. It's a functional definition based on who's on the board making the grant decisions. And two, half of this amount, or roughly $52 billion, comes from family foundations. So if you think about it, all the people over here, back here, where these people were putting money into foundations, and some of the people over here were putting money into the foundations, they're still alive. So instead of giving through their checkbooks on their 1040s, taking deductions over here, they took deductions when they funded the foundation, and now the money is coming through the foundation as a grant. It's still individual giving. It's still the choices being made by living individuals who still control the assets that they put into the foundation, even though they've dedicated them to charity. Rebecca.
Where do donor-advised funds fall into this?
This is wonderful. They don't. When individuals make a gift to a donor-advised fund, it counts. They take the deduction if they take them, if they're eligible for the deduction. But they could take the deduction at the time the gift is made to that donor-advised fund. The money lives in a charity, and in most cases, those funds are reallocated within 5 years. So Giving USA has taken the position that they are not new money for charity. They're transferred from the household asset to a charitable asset, and the charity is going to allocate it out, based on the donor's suggestions, across all the subsectors. Because it's done within 5 years, it's not using just the interest that's earned. They're actually giving away the corpus, the principal, the original gift. They don't count it as new money for charity. It's the same as if you gave to your congregation and the congregation made a gift to Heifer International. Or if you gave to United Way And United Way allocates all those dollars within the year. It's a transfer from one charity to another. It doesn't count as new money. It is around $35 billion. So it definitely pushes this up above the 499, but it doesn't show up in the Giving USA pie chart. Only when the deductible gift is made. Is that clear as mud? Yeah. Yeah. So if you wanted to, you could put another circle over here that's around $32 billion. That's what donor advised funds then reallocate from the gifts that they received, typically in the prior 5 years. Not always, but typically within the prior 5 years. So that said, there are donor advised funds at community foundations. In many cases, not all, community foundations invest the money and the donor is using the interest to make the grants. That is considered new money for charity. So they're not drawing down the corpus of the original gift. They're making grants from the amount that's earned and leaving the original gift, most of it, to accumulate in additional value. So when a part of this is community foundations, and that does include the donor advised funds. It is so confusing. I can do an entire day session on counting donor advised fund money. Seriously, it's really hard. Okay, so half of this is family foundations. There's, family members are sitting around saying, well, Grandpa left us this money and we want to allocate it. And so you need to know who those people are. And you don't just go up to them and say, hi, I'm an XYZ organization. I want you to make us a grant. You work your network, you go to Rotary, you find them however you can, introduce your mission, etc. And then half of it is usually just application, some kind of staff decision. The Community Foundation here has a whole bunch of people who work on what they call community investment. There's a team, there's a director, an associate, a coordinator, there's a whole team of people. Those are people you need to know for the Capital Area Community Foundation. Bequests are 9% of the total. One, this has been going up because that transfer of wealth is underway. And two, who makes the decisions to make a bequest? Living individuals. Who is actually making bequests? The data show it is often women with no children or married couples with no children. Single guys with no children tend not to be bequest donors. They've always exceptions. They tend not to be bequest donors to charities. They also tend not to be donors to charities. But if you have a long-term donor, any amount, who's 50 or over, it's worth having the conversation about how much they care about your organization, and if they have any thoughts about how they'd like to continue your organization's work when they are no longer actively participating. Don't say die. When they are no longer actively participating. And your community foundation can be a resource for this. If you don't already have a planned giving program in your organization, talk to the Capital Region Community Foundation. And in addition to the community investment side, they also have a giving side. And they have people who will have expertise in structuring gifts that will help people who have assets figure out how they'd like to benefit your charity when they're no longer actively participating. They need their own lawyer, but the Community Foundation can help you. That's one thing that community foundations do in their communities. Make sense? The Symphony might have its own planned giving program, sort of, maybe. Okay. I don't know if any of the other organizations here are large enough to have invested in having planned giving staff. Hospitals and universities often do. But smaller organizations tend not to because it seems like a very long payout, high cost to carry that. But do talk to the Community Foundation folks on the giving side and see if they'd be willing to help you out in some way. Oftentimes they want you to have, house the funds with them and they'll manage it for you too. That's one way they support their work. But bequests, it's like anything. Bequests typically happen because somebody asked for it. Amy's story notwithstanding, she has a great story. You can ask her about it. But the more we ask, the more requests that there will be in the nonprofit sector. My generation is ceasing our active participation. And even if it's not a bequest, there are other ways that people can support your work. They can make a life insurance beneficiary designation. They can make a designation from their IRA, or whatever the retirement plan is, beneficiary designation. That costs them nothing. They don't even have to see an attorney. Usually it's an online form if they are comfortable online. And it can be 1%. It can be a very modest amount, but even so, it will help you in the long run with your organization's mission. So at 6% of the total, just under 30 billion, is corporations. Now these are not 501c3s. They're the big companies, the ones that have brand names, that list shareholders, they're giving, and I give. I have a corporation for my own business. That includes all of us, 5 million or so companies across the United States. We tend to think about going to the largest companies because they're the largest employers. They're driving a lot of the income that households receive, but in fact, more people work for small companies than work for large companies. The most generous donors in terms of being willing to help are entrepreneurs who run their own businesses. Why? Because we figure we can make it up later. If I really, really care about, I'm one person. I don't have a payroll. I use contractors, but I don't have a payroll. If I really, really want to support your charity, I'll say, I'll get 2 more clients and that will cover my gift. Your charity is so important to me that I will work harder and longer in order to raise the money to have in my household budget in order to support the work that I care about. Entrepreneurs that are able to do that are the most generous donors in terms of the percentage that they give. Big companies tend to cap their giving at around 1% of their pre-tax profits. Entrepreneurs, it might be 5 or 10%. They're allowed to take up to 10. That's a deduction. Small businesses, entrepreneurial startups in your area, people who have small retail shops that can help you, they tend to run on smaller margins, but those are the kinds of places to try to build relationships and to find members of for your board. Much more common than large companies, much more generous in terms of being willing to say yes and finding a way to make something happen. It's still not the place where you want to invest most of your time, because that's over here. If you can find an individual who also happens to be employed in a company to give you entree to that company, even better. Many companies will make gifts because they have employees who volunteer at a place, for example. And that's the entree that you have. In addition to the donor advised fund question, are there any other questions about what we call the sources side? Yes, go
I had
ahead.
a question actually about your first slide. I was just wondering if the current tax law continues to, which doesn't allow for very many deductions, if that continues to suppress giving.
It seems to, but I've said for years that the tax code helps us remember our gifts. It doesn't necessarily change whether we'll make them or not. So when we're capped at, as we were, $300 or $600, we tend to remember $258 worth of giving. I did the arithmetic, and that's what it averaged out to for the 2 years that we had it's called above the line deduction. So my guess is if we started asking you all, well, what were your charitable gifts this year? You could list some, but unless you've been assiduous about keeping receipts, you probably won't remember all of them. And in fact, your giving might be 3 times or 4 times what you actually recall if you're asked. So while these numbers are based on taxes and they're based on interviews and surveys, they don't necessarily represent what people are actually doing. And one reason I say that is that for 6 out of the 10 years, what we call the uses side, where the money goes, if you totaled all the amounts, it would be 10 to 20% higher than what's coming on the tax return side. So, because, in part because of the data sources, we don't really have a really good picture. The people who do deduct, of course they remember, because they keep everything because they want to maximize the benefit of the giving. People who don't deduct, we're probably still giving, just not remembering it, or not remembering everything. Any other questions on this one? Okay, so, excuse me. I don't like year-on-year changes. You might have guessed, because I like the 40-year graph, right? But this tends to get the press. So it does matter that remember I talked about current dollars, the ones in my pocket now look a lot like the ones in my pocket in 1982. In current dollars, giving did fall in 2022 by 3.4%. It rose by 6.2% in 2021. Remember, we had a high stock market. We had urgent needs in 2021. So the cumulative change is 2.7%. We're still ahead of where we were in 2020. Individual giving fell, kind of evened out. Typically in Giving USA, if the percentage change is 1% or less, we say there's no change. Here it's 1.2, so this is 5.6 and 6.4%. Individual giving has stayed very consistent. Foundation giving jumped a lot in 2021, urgent needs. Some foundations were actually borrowing money, they were issuing bonds. And they slowed it back down in 2022 because the stock market slowed down a lot. And they make their giving based on the earnings that they have, the appreciated earnings that they have in their portfolios. Bequests, who dies because they want to make a charitable gift? Because they want to make a charitable gift? No. Bequests are driven entirely by factors that are totally outside of any organization or individual's control, as long as the bequest is there in the first place. So fell in 2021, increased in 2022. It's just sort of the luck of the draw, whose estate closed. And then corporations gave generously in 2021, and then they gave again, but not quite as generously in 2022. These changes are helpful if you track your own performance against Giving USA. I strongly recommend using a time series, not a 2-year picture. So I would use a 5-year time series. If you decide you want the data tables that are available online, look at the individuals, corporations, foundations, and bequests, and use a 5-year time series and map out what your donors are doing against that 5-year time series. You could use 10. Beyond that, you're starting to get into completely different groups of donors. So it doesn't, I mean, you're not looking at changes among the same population. But so I would recommend a couple years anyway. And these are adjusted for inflation. Again, it's 10% down. Because inflation was so bad. So for us, it feels horrible. Because in the nonprofit sector, we experienced that inflation just as much or more than the households did. So this is, when we talk to our boards, we'd like to recoup that 10% in terms of, in this year, and even grow a little bit more so that we can continue to meet our operating expenses. And if we really want to do fair and equitable wages and some other things, we might want to push it up even more. This is excuse me, I did not design these graphs. If I did, they wouldn't look like this. These very light bars are individual giving, and this is going back 40 years in 5-year groups. Because remember, time spans matter, and it's adjusted for inflation. So these top bars are individual giving, and it went from 1 trillion, basically, in the 5 years that ended in 1987, to 2.6 trillion in the 5 years that ended in 2022. It increased by 2.6 times. That's phenomenal. In 40 years, 2.6 times. Right? Foundations are next. A little teeny weeny bar here is just 65 billion down here. 64.7. 65. 486 billion. That's almost 8 times. It's 7 point something times increase. 2.6 time increase here in individuals. 4.7% increase over here. Why? Those family foundations. Watch to see if any form in your area. Yes?
I was going to say, obviously this is showing a trend that people are actually pulling away from individual giving and putting into.
High wealth people are definitely doing that, yes. not everybody. So it costs something to run a foundation, so it's, I don't know what the threshold is where people decide it's worth it, but yeah, we're definitely seeing it in the high net worth field, which constrains many of us because we don't have access to those donors. They're not in every community. So, again, we've got the bequest side, 68 billion, 237 billion, so almost 3 times, sorry, gotta do my math right. 62 up to 136. So corporations are growing more slowly than foundations. Bequests are growing pretty well, and individuals continue to grow 2.6 times in the 40 years. It's still worthwhile to invest in individual cultivation and development. That is where the effort needs to be made. We tend to hire proposal writers. We tend to hire people to do corporate and foundation work because we'll think we'll get $25,000 at a time. Yes, but don't do it for very long, because in the long run, you really want to be talking with the individuals in your community. Now, one of the changes that we have seen, and this goes back to your question, ma'am, in the blue sweater, this name is very long. The Indiana University, Lilly, Family School of Philanthropy, which is the source of these data, also does that household survey that I mentioned that reaches 10,000 households every other year. And they ask those 10,000 households, nationally representative sample by income, by wealth, up to the 95th percentile. So the super, super high wealthy, they don't answer surveys, thank you very much. They got other things to do with their time. But the rest of us, there's somebody in that survey who represents us. So the percentage of households that give to charity stabilized around 3/4 from 2000 to 2008. They only started the study in 2000. So 2000, 2, 4, 6, 8, around 66% of the households were giving in each one of those waves of the survey. 2008, it started, 2010 it went down, 2012 it went down, 2014 it went down, well from your perspective, down, 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 and it's 50% in 2018. We don't have the analysis yet for 2020. I expect it will go up because lots of people gave in 2020, new donors, completely new donors. And of course 2022, they're still asking the questions. So it'll take a while to catch up. 2018 is also that tax law change. So we don't know yet how that will play out over time because it takes a while to collect data from 10,000 households. But the challenge for us is to convince people that the need is urgent, that they need to find the resources. Look under the couch, figure out how to give up a cup of frothy coffee. Whatever it is, something that's important to them, if they can find the resources, you can put them to good use to solve the problem, whether it's children grieving or ending child and sexual abuse or creating an art gallery or providing music for the community through the symphony. Whatever that need is, articulate it in such a way and tell people, give people examples about how donors have afforded gifts, even when they don't have a lot of assets themselves. I have, back when I had 3 kids, cleaned out the car to find all the loose change that fell behind the back seat and been able to support a charitable gift. It can happen. And this is, you get the things that say for $179 you can give somebody a Thanksgiving dinner. Cost of a cup of coffee, you can change somebody's life. That's one reason those kinds of messages appear on appeals, to help people realize that for essentially spare change in their life, they can transform somebody else's life beyond measure. So in your organization, it's $5 a month, that's $60 a year. Ask people to make the trade. I don't know if you want to mention any brand of coffee, but a nice cup of coffee, or clean out behind the couch. Your husband's all the change that falls behind. Sorry, you guys, but when my husband lies down, everything falls out of his pocket. So I make a mint that way, right? I had a friend who every month, all the money she found in her family's laundry was hers. So all those kinds of things, people can can use, what spare change can make a difference, and that will drive people to think about. And then we do good stewardship. We say, thank you so much. Your $5 combined with every other donor's contribution has made it possible for us to do X. Whatever X is, whatever wonderful work you're doing. You tell the donor that even $5 makes a difference. There's research that shows that people who know that their even small gifts make a difference feel loyal to the organization, and they are more likely to renew again. Okay, but again, you're going to ask people about bequests, remember, because that's also growing from just under 770 billion up to 200, that's 3 times, 237 billion. So find those donors who, especially women with no children, who have been loyal donors who are 50 or over. You can invite them to a seminar about estate planning. Maybe Clark Schaefer can help you organize one, I don't know. But don't want to speak for you, Luke. You can invite them to a session where they talk to, where among the group are other people who have already made bequests to your organization. And they're primed to talk about, yeah, I'm so excited, I just put such and such group in my will. I know people